Hey, everybody. Welcome to Good Shepherd Lutheran Church. As always, um, sorry, I was trying to get out of that light, shut it off my head. Um, as always, we're glad you could be with us. We hope this morning's worship experience and this time of devotional. Again, I just want to take a moment and thank everybody who is watching us here on um, our YouTube channel or our Facebook channel with my reflections every week and Don's daily reading. In our worship services and our special services for Advent and time together. So I just really, from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you all for watching. And again, every time I hope there's still a little piece of it um, that, that you can reflect on and brings meaning to you, then it makes it all worth it. And even if you don't get that feeling every week, I'm sure somebody does. So we rejoice in that as well, because today we're going to be reading the psalm from this past Sunday, the third week in Advent, which was Psalm 126, which is about, let us read our text then from Psalm 126. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter and our tongue with shouts of joy. Then it was said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us, and we rejoiced. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like the water courses in the Negeb. May those who sow in tears reap with shouts of joy. Those who go without weeping, bearing the seed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, carrying their sheaves. Amen. Now, I realize that this is a very short psalm, especially for a psalm. It's only 6 verses, but it is pretty powerful and pretty amazing. The theological theme in 126 is restoration, and that restoration is woven together in the theme of rejoicing. This has been described as one of the grandest, most eloquent, lyrical prayers that is in all the Psalms. Psalm basically has 2 stanzas. Stanza 1 is 1 through 3. The second is 4 through 6. And the first stanza in Psalm 126 recalls all of God's past actions of reconciliation and the emotions and the joy and celebration and even laughter that accompanied those saving acts. The clause with which the psalm begins, when the Lord restores the fortunes of Zion, most likely has people in mind of the return of the people to the land following the Babylonian exile, but with a broader biblical narrative. Excuse me. The phrase calls for other divine restorations to come to mind. Can you think of any? Maybe the restoration of Sarah to Abraham. Maybe the restoration of Joseph to Jacob and his other brothers. The restoration of the people to the land after the Exodus. Or the birth of the Messiah, the restoration of Jesus to his parents, and the restoration of all of us through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. See, the phrase that we were like those who dream, it conjures the imagination of all kinds of meanings. One meaning then could be is that divine restoration includes the reopening of the lines of communication between God and God's people. Then there's a meaning of ecstatic joy, kind of like David dancing beside the ark as it was brought into Jerusalem. The picture then is of spontaneous and uncontrollable joy. Our mouth was filled with laughter and our tongues with shouts of joy. This first stanza also contains what I consider to be perhaps one of the most surprising testimonies concerning God's gracious deeds in the entire Old Testament. The nations, that is, the people who worship other gods and have often threatened Israel, praised God. The very people who during the years in Babylon looked upon God's people and were astonished at him. These very nations witnessed the restoration of the people to their land and to their God, and they said, "The Lord has done great things to them." Thinking ahead to the New Testament, one is reminded of maybe the non-Israelite magi coming to worship the one who is born King of the Jews, or the Roman centurion who announced, "Truly, this man was God's son." Even more surprising is the nation's testimony to God's deeds inspires Israel to respond with its own testimony, repeating the words of the nation almost verbatim. The Lord has done great things to us. See, often in the Psalms, the enemy's words are quoted as a reason for God to punish them. But here, the words of the other nations are quoted approvingly. Even more shockingly, the people of God then repeat those same words. Why? Because God's gracious and faithful acts of restoration are self-evident, even so evident that the blind nations can see them. And if blind nations can see those acts, then the often even more blind people of God can see them too. The second stanza, verses 4-6, it basically develops the themes that were introduced in the first stanza, and it just rephrases them and their form of renewed appeals for restoration. The people ask God, restore them once again in order that they may rejoice again. The psalm paints bountiful images, dry riverbeds coursing through torrents of water, farmers weeping as they plant because they did not expect a harvest. Those farmers then singing joyfully as they harvest because creation has produced an unlooked for and unexpected bounty. These same farmers bearing heavy sheaves of produce as they return home from the fields. These images may reflect a prayer for rescue from drought, but they also simply be metaphors for people in need of God's restoring actions in many different crises in their lives. Crises of spiritual drought, of national military defeat, or of plague, or we could go on and on. Again, this is all good, but I refer back to C.S. Lewis as far as how this can bring importance to our lives. See, he wrote an autobiography of his conversation in a book, and that book's name was Surprised by Joy. How fitting, huh? But Lewis wrote, "Joy must be sharply distinguished both from happiness and pleasure. Joy has indeed one characteristic and only one in common with them, the fact that anyone who has experienced it will want it again. I doubt whether anyone who has tasted it would ever, if both were in his power, exchange it for all the pleasures in the world. But joy is never in our power, and pleasure often is." Lewis points out that real joy occurs when we are not expecting it. If we look for it, then joy usually evades us. If we go back to something that gave us joy before, it may once again reward us, but the experience it's just not the same. It's not quite as same as it was the first time we experienced it, because the first time we experienced it, it was a surprise of the unexpected and unanticipated pleasure that makes it so joyful. Lewis also captures another truth that is very evident in Psalm 126, and it is true for all the joys in our life. All joy emphasizes our pilgrim status, always reminds and beckons and awakens desire, our best havings or wantings. In Psalm 126, which is certainly one of the most remarkable texts of joy in the Bible. Again, everybody, I'm glad you joined me again this week. I know it was a little short, but the psalm itself was a little short too. But I will be with you next week, Wednesday, December 23rd. So I look forward to us spending some time. I know it turns into a crazy week with preparations for Christmas and Christmas Eve and all of that. But I hope you'll be able to spend some time with us. Hopefully you'll be able to join us tonight at 7 for our Advent reflections, on some questions. But until we see each other again, take care of yourselves and each other.